Thank you for listening to our mystery audiobook channel. Your support means the world to us. So please subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of more intriguing mysteries released twice weekly. And now for the feature presentation, The Secret at Ravenwood Court. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Ravenwood. Inspector Price stood at the tall window of his office at Scotland Yard. He held a telegram in his hand, an unassuming strip of cream paper with tight, elegant script that bore more weight than its size suggested. It read, "Inspector Price, your discretion and immediate presence are required at Ravenwood Court. No police are to be involved beyond yourself. I trust your instincts. Lord Whitmore." He read it a second time, brow furrowing. The name Whitmore rang faintly, an old aristocratic line from Devonshire. He had never met the man, but the tone of the telegram was unmistakable. Urgency, wrapped in diplomacy, laced with secrecy. Price crossed the room and reached for his overcoat. He had dealt with enough society families to know that when someone of Lord Whitmore's standing requested privacy, it was rarely about anything trivial. Whatever had happened at Ravenwood, it was either too sensitive for public knowledge or involved a scandal that needed careful containment. Within the hour, Price was aboard the morning train to Exeter. The countryside blurred past the windows in wintry hues, patches of snow lingering in the hedgerows. He took out the telegram again and studied the handwriting. Elegant, controlled, possibly written by a steward or a trusted secretary. As the train chugged into the Devonshire lowlands, the scenery grew more desolate. A light drizzle began to tap against the window panes, and mist clung to the hills. It was a land of old estates and older secrets. At Exeter station, a black motor car awaited him, its lacquered sides dripping with rain. The driver, a stiff, clean-shaven man in an oilskin coat, gave a curt nod as he opened the door. "Inspector Price?" "Yes. Welcome to Devon, sir. Lord Whitmore sends his regards. It's a 2-hour drive to Ravenwood." They drove in silence, the windscreen wipers making a rhythmic squeak. Through narrow country lanes and dense pine forests, the car finally emerged onto a long gravel drive, flanked by tall yew hedges. In the distance, Ravenwood Court appeared like something out of a Gothic painting, a towering manor house with ivy-choked walls, mullioned windows, and sharply pitched gables. The stone was dark, weather-worn, and rain-slicked. A murder of crows scattered as the motor car came to a halt before the arched portico. A butler appeared, tall and gaunt, with an impassive face and pale blue eyes that seemed to observe more than they expressed. "Inspector Price, Lord Whitmore awaits you in the drawing-room." Price handed off his hat and coat and followed the butler through the dim corridors. There was no sound but the faint tick of a grandfather clock and the rain against the windows. The drawing-room was a vast chamber with high ceilings and a crackling fire that tried in vain to warm its corners. Lord Whitmore stood near the hearth, tall and spare, with a sharp jaw and a silver mane combed back from his temple. "Inspector Price," he said, extending a long hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I gathered from your telegram that discretion was important. Crucial. A man has died. Officially, it's an accident, but I am not convinced." "Who was the man?" "Mr. Percival Trent, a guest, a historian of some repute. He arrived 3 nights ago for our weekend gathering. Last evening, he was found at the foot of the library staircase. The local constable ruled it a fall. Slippery steps, poor lighting, but I believe it to be more than that." "What makes you suspicious, Lord Whitmore?" The old aristocrat hesitated, then walked to a writing desk and opened a drawer. He removed a leather-bound notebook, its corner charred and edges blackened as though it had been singed. "This was found in Mr. Trent's room this morning, hidden behind a false panel in his valise. The rest of his papers were destroyed in the fire. This was all that remained." Price opened the notebook. Most of the pages were burned, but faint phrases could still be discerned. Legacy buried, chapel, coin, betrayal. Curious phrases, cryptic. May I see the scene? Lord Whitmore nodded. The library remains undisturbed, save for the removal of the body. I've instructed the staff not to touch anything. Price rose from his chair and turned to the firelight, his gaze steady. One more question. Before I begin, he said, how many guests are here this weekend? 8, Lord Whitmore replied. All of them know each other, and all of them knew Mr. Trent. Price glanced down once more at the scorched notebook. 8 guests, a dead historian, a burned manuscript. Chapter 2. A Death Before Supper. The library at Ravenwood Court was a cathedral of knowledge, an expansive chamber panelled in dark oak and lined from floor to ceiling with dusty volumes. A spiral staircase wound up the far wall to a narrow gallery that ringed the upper shelves, and a skylight high above let in only the weakest grey light through rain-smeared panes. Inspector Price stood at the threshold, still and observant. His footsteps echoed faintly as he walked across the worn Persian rug toward the foot of the staircase, where a velvet rope had been placed. The rope cordoned off the very spot where, only a day ago, Mr. Percival Trent had been discovered. His skull cracked open on the marble floor. Found here, Lord Whitmore said quietly from behind him, at approximately 7:30 in the evening. Mrs. Norwood, our housekeeper, was the first to stumble upon the body. She had come to light the evening lanterns. Price crouched low and ran his fingers along the marble. A faint outline remained where blood had pooled, partially scrubbed away. Near the base of the steps, a faint gouge could be seen on the wooden tread. Interesting, he murmured. Do you see something? Asked Whitmore. Possibly. This notch on the stair suggests a hard object struck the wood. Perhaps the edge of a walking stick or the corner of a heavy book. But the body was found well away from the staircase, not crumpled against it. He turned his head slowly to survey the upper gallery. Tell me, how tall was Mr. Trent? About 5 feet 9 inches, thin building, wore spectacles, slight stoop in the shoulder, an academic through and through. Price ascended the staircase slowly, his gloved hand trailing along the carved banister. Books lined the upper shelves, histories, genealogies, volumes of obscure religious tracts. As he reached the top, he crouched low again, inspecting the gallery floor. A few small shards of glass glinted in the dim light. He held one up. A broken lens, he muttered, likely from his spectacles. Below, Lord Whitmore called up. He was found without them. We thought perhaps they shattered in the fall. Perhaps, Price said non-committally. But why would they be left up here while the body was down there? He pocketed the shard and descended. After inspecting the room, Price turned to Whitmore. I'd like to speak with the housekeeper and then meet your guests. Of course, I'll have Mrs. Norwood brought to the morning room. The morning room was modest by Ravenwood standards, warm, panelled in lighter wood, with a few faded hunting prints on the walls. A tea tray had been laid out with bone china, untouched. Price stood near the window as Mrs. Norwood, a trim, grey-haired woman with a stern expression and perfectly pressed apron, entered and curtsied slightly. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Norwood, Price said. You found the body? Yes, sir. Yesterday evening. I went to the library just before supper to draw the curtains and light the lamps. And there he was, sprawled on the floor like a rag doll. His head was terribly injured, sir. You'd seen Mr. Trent earlier in the day? Oh, yes, at breakfast and then briefly in the afternoon when he asked me for directions to the family chapel. I told him guests aren't permitted in the chapel without Lord Whitmore's permission. He apologised and said he was only curious. The family chapel, is it in use? Not since the late Lady Whitmore passed. That was 2 winters ago. Now it's locked, though I do dust it weekly. Did Mr. Trent say why he was interested? Mrs. Norwood hesitated, lowering her voice. He asked if it had ever held any burials. He seemed oddly insistent. Price frowned. Had he been acting strangely since his arrival? She glanced over her shoulder before replying. More intense than strange. He was always scribbling in a little notebook and disappearing into the study or the library. And he argued with Mr. Finch, the book collector, from London. I saw it myself 2 days ago. Mr. Finch shouted something about damaging reputations and stormed off. Inspector Price made a mental note. Very well, Mrs. Norwood. One last thing. Were any of the other guests in the library that evening before supper? Not that I know of. Most were still dressing, I believe. Supper was served at 8 sharp. She curtsied again and departed, her steps fading down the hallway. Lord Whitmore re-entered shortly after. I believe it's time I introduced you to the rest of the guests, Inspector. They're gathered in the red drawing-room. I've told them you're conducting inquiries regarding Mr. Trent's unfortunate accident. Let them believe that for now, Price said, adjusting his cuffs, until I know which one of them had reason to ensure it was no accident. The red drawing-room was all velvet and shadows, with a blazing hearth that barely softened the tension in the air. 7 people looked up as Inspector Price entered, each one distinct in posture, attire, and expression. Lord Whitmore made the introductions. Lady Frances Dalrymple, widowed and willowy, with sharp eyes behind a fan. Mr. Harold Finch, a rotund, red-faced antiquarian, with sweat beading his forehead. Miss Clara Whitmore, Lord Whitmore's intelligent, self-possessed niece. Colonel Bertram Hargrove, retired military, stiff and watchful. Mrs. Eugenie Archer, a novelist with flamboyant silks and a mocking smile. Dr. Julian North, a pale man with round spectacles, who barely nodded. Mr. Simeon Clark, a young painter with ink-stained fingers and distracted air. They made for an impressive tableau, Price thought, as he offered a mild smile. I regret that my visit comes under such unfortunate circumstances, he began, but as Mr. Trent's death occurred under this roof, it is my duty to ensure nothing was overlooked. The room tensed, but no one spoke. I will be speaking with each of you privately, he added. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. His eyes flicked from face to face. Some looked away, some did not. All were hiding something, he had no doubt. Chapter 3. The Guests and Their Secrets. Inspector Price had long held the belief that most murders are the result of 3 things: opportunity, motive, and secrets. The first could be measured, the second suspected, but it was the third, the secrets, that always left the deepest tracks. He requested interviews with each guest individually. Lord Whitmore assigned him the estate study, a formal room filled with polished oak, leather-bound books, and a single oil painting of the late Lady Whitmore above the hearth. Price chose a hard-backed armchair in the corner and opened his notebook. The first to arrive was Mr. Harold Finch, the portly antiquarian. He waddled in with nervous energy, his brow already damp despite the chill, a handkerchief twitching in his fingers. Please have a seat, Price said politely. Thank you, Inspector. Dreadful business, all this. You knew Mr. Trent well. I knew of him. We moved in similar academic circles. He was a historian of some acclaim, though more recently he'd grown rather, how shall I say, provocative. In what way? Finch sighed and shifted in his chair. Trent made it his business to pry into matters better left alone. Private affairs, family secrets. He claimed it was all for posterity, but I suspect he simply enjoyed wielding what he discovered. Was there something specific he uncovered that upset you? Finch's eyes darted. We had a disagreement, yes. Trent implied he was preparing a manuscript that would rewrite the history of several English noble families, including the Whitmores. I told him he was playing with fire. Did he tell you what he had found? He was cryptic, mentioned an old will, a misplaced inheritance. I thought it idle bluffing, but he seemed convinced, obsessed even. Price took a note. Where were you yesterday evening at 7:30? In the drawing-room with Lady Frances. She can vouch for me. Next came Lady Frances Dalrymple, tall and stoic. She settled into the chair with aristocratic poise, her gloved hands clasped neatly. Inspector, she began, I trust this won't take long. I'm due in Bath next week and have no desire to linger at an estate being turned into a crime scene. You were in the drawing-room with Mr. Finch last night? I was, though I hardly consider his presence company. You did not care for him? I do not care for men who sweat profusely, bluster, and whisper in corners. He was clearly hiding something, though I doubt he has the constitution for murder. Did you know Mr. Trent? Only superficially. I once attended a lecture he gave on medieval property disputes. I remember thinking that he would be better suited to the theatre. Very dramatic and too fond of scandal. Did he speak to you while here? Not directly, but I overheard him muttering in the corridor, something about bloodlines and theft. Do you know what he meant? She raised a brow. Perhaps he found something in your host's family tree that didn't quite add up. Miss Clara Whitmore followed. She wore a dark green dress with a brooch shaped like a raven. Mr. Trent's death has shaken the household, she said, but I admit I did not like him. Because? He was invasive. He asked me about my mother, how she died, what year. He asked whether Lord Whitmore had ever mentioned a first will. I found it intrusive and refused to answer. Do you believe he found such a will? She hesitated. If he did, it would be deeply unsettling. My father left everything to Uncle Whitmore and me. If there was a previous version, it could change everything. Inspector Price studied her. Did you see Mr. Trent yesterday evening? I saw him from the upper hallway around 7 o'clock. He was heading to the library with a sheaf of papers. Did anyone else go in? She frowned. I think I saw Dr. North lingering nearby. He looked agitated. Dr. Julian North entered next, thin and pale. He was the household physician, but as Price quickly discovered, had once been Trent's student many years ago. He was brilliant, North murmured, staring at the rug, but also cruel. How so? He wielded knowledge like a blade. He humiliated his students when they erred. He published personal letters in an academic journal, mine among them. It nearly ended my career. So you had reason to dislike him. I had reason to despise him, but I did not kill him, Inspector. Where were you during the time of death? In the East Conservatory, alone. I often retreat there when the manor feels too full. No one can verify that. No one? Mrs. Eugenie Archer swept in like a stage actress, all silk and clinking bangles. She smelled faintly of lilac and ink. I knew Percy Trent very well, she said, reclining dramatically. In fact, he once proposed to me. I declined. You remained friends? Of a sort. He intrigued me, as men of danger often do. But in the end, I found him more serpent than scholar. Did he confide in you? Not directly, but I knew he was up to something. He spoke of a chapel, a secret, a revelation. He wanted to write a book that would shatter the pillars of English society, as he put it. Honestly, it sounded absurd. Where were you last night? In my room, writing. I had a burst of inspiration. You may confirm it by the ink on my sleeves. Colonel Bertram Hargrove was next. He sat down with military straightness, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Never liked the fellow, he said gruffly. Always peering, always smirking. Men like that don't belong in honourable company. Did he speak to you? He asked about my service record. Odd questions, as if looking for discrepancies. Were there any? The colonel's jaw tightened. No. Where were you during the time of death? In the billiards room, alone. Last came Mr. Simeon Clark, the young painter with a distracted manner. He arrived with ink-stained cuffs and a paintbrush still tucked behind his ear. Poor Mr. Trent, he said dreamily. He had a fascinating face. I was sketching him earlier that day, actually. Did he sit for you? No, but I caught his expression at lunch, a look of triumph, as though he'd just found something valuable. Did he tell you anything? He mumbled something when we passed in the corridor. They'll never bury the truth in stone. I have no idea what he meant. I thought it was poetry. Where were you last night? In my studio, in the West Wing, sketching. When the interviews concluded, Inspector Price sat alone in the study, reviewing his notes. Each guest had a motive, or at least a reason, to dislike the victim. Many had no solid alibi. The talk of an old will, of bloodlines, of buried truths, these themes repeated like a chorus. But what caught his attention most was Trent's obsession with the chapel. Twice now, the old chapel had come up, linked to inheritance, to secrets, to history itself. Price rose and crossed to the window. The rain had stopped, and the estate grounds glistened in the fading grey light. He would visit the chapel in the morning. Chapter 4. The Locked Chapel. Morning broke grey and windless over Ravenwood Court. Inspector Price stood at the library window, sipping dark coffee from a china cup. He had risen early, hours before the others, and reviewed his notes in silence while the great house slumbered. 7 guests, 7 secrets, 1 dead historian, and a chapel that everyone spoke of, but no one seemed to enter. He replaced the cup on the saucer and made his way downstairs, bypassing the breakfast room and slipping quietly out the east corridor that led to the family chapel. The path was slick with dew and framed by twisted yews. Crows cawed distantly in the fog. The chapel appeared before him like a stone sentinel, small and ancient, built in the Romanesque style, with narrow arched windows and a moss-covered roof. Ivy clung to its southern wall. A simple wooden door stood at the entrance, iron-bound and bolted. He tried the handle, locked. Moments later, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Clara Whitmore, bundled in a grey cloak, her breath forming soft clouds in the chill. "I thought you might come here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you follow me? I often walk here in the mornings. I find it peaceful, though today it feels different. Heavy, somehow." Price gestured to the door. "You wouldn't happen to have the key, would you?" She hesitated. "Uncle keeps it, but I know where it's hidden." His eyebrows rose. She stepped past him to the base of a crumbling angel statue nearby. From beneath its stone wings, she withdrew a small brass key, aged and cold. "He hides it here. He never enters the chapel anymore. Not since Aunt Margaret died." "Would he approve of you bringing me here?" "I suspect not, but if Mr. Trent really found something, we need to know what it was." Price accepted the key. The lock turned with a groan, and the door creaked inward to reveal a musty darkness. The chapel interior was solemn and still. Dust motes danced in the thin rays of light, filtering through stained glass windows, depicting biblical scenes. The air smelled of wax and damp stone. At the front stood a marble altar beneath a carved wooden crucifix. To either side were low pews, long unused. Inspector Price moved slowly down the central aisle. Clara remained by the door, watching him. Behind the altar lay a small crypt door, barely noticeable behind faded tapestries. It bore a crest, 3 ravens and a sword, the Whitmore family sigil. He turned to Clara. "May I?" She nodded. He knelt and examined the door. No lock, just an old iron ring. The crypt beyond was a low vaulted room lit by 2 narrow slits in the stone. There were 3 carved sarcophagi, each adorned with a name: Elias Whitmore, Edmund Whitmore, and Rosamond Whitmore. Lords and ladies of centuries past. But it wasn't the tombs that caught Price's eye. It was the corner of the chamber, where dust had been disturbed. Recent footprints. A trail led to a stone panel in the wall. He knelt and ran his gloved fingers along the edges. The panel moved. Behind it was a niche, barely a foot deep, and inside it sat a small wooden coffer. He drew it out and set it on the floor. It was locked with a simple latch. Clara crouched beside him, eyes wide. "What is it?" He opened it slowly. Inside were a stack of parchment pages, yellowed with age but intact, and beneath them an antique gold coin, its face stamped with a Roman emperor's likeness. Price picked it up and held it to the light. "This coin, it's real. Probably 2nd century, worth a fortune." Clara leaned closer. "What's written on the parchment?" Price scanned the top sheet. It was a will. It read, "This is my true and final will, written with full knowledge and intent. I, Elias Whitmore, having no direct heir, leave Ravenwood Court and all associated holdings to Margaret Trent, daughter of my sister Lucinda." Clara inhaled sharply. "Margaret Trent?" "Your aunt," Price said softly. "And if this is genuine, The rightful heir to Ravenwood Court. She paled. But my uncle inherited everything. The estate, the title. He said there was no other claim. Apparently, there was, and Mr. Trent must have discovered this. Margaret Trent was his mother. That makes Percival Trent the rightful heir. They both rose slowly, the air thick with realization. If Trent had revealed this publicly, Price murmured, it would have stripped Whitmore of everything. Title, land, even his place in the Lords. The scandal would have been enormous. Clara stepped back, one hand over her mouth. Then someone killed him to keep it silent. Someone who knew he had this, or feared what he would do with it. Price returned the will and the coin to the coffer and shut the niche carefully. He turned to Clara. We say nothing of this yet. Let your uncle believe we're still in the dark. She nodded slowly, though her hands trembled. Back at the manor, breakfast was in full swing. Bacon and kidneys sizzled. Toast was buttered. Conversations were shallow and polite, but there was an undercurrent of tension. He re-entered the drawing-room shortly after, and found Colonel Hargrove and Dr. North speaking in hushed tones. They broke apart when they saw him. Morning, Inspector, the Colonel grunted. A fine day for murder, eh? Let's hope it's the last one we see. He nodded toward the hearth. On the mantel lay a small silver-framed photograph of Lord Whitmore, his late wife Margaret, and a teenage boy, Trent. The resemblance was unmistakable now. Price turned away. The lines were forming more clearly. A hidden will, a buried inheritance, and a man who'd gotten too close to a truth others wanted forgotten. The mystery at Ravenwood was no longer just about how Percival Trent died. It was about who had the most to lose by him living. Chapter 5. A Midnight Search. Inspector Price rarely suffered from insomnia, but that night's sleep proved elusive. The discovery in the chapel weighed on him, not just for the implications it held for Clara Whitmore and her uncle, but for the widening circle of suspects it created. If Percival Trent had uncovered an alternate will, it could change a lot of things. At precisely midnight, Price rose from his guest room, dressed quietly, and slipped into the corridor. The manor was hushed, blanketed in a velvet silence, broken only by the occasional groan of ancient wood and the distant tick of a hallway clock. He moved with practiced quiet, past portraits of Whitmore ancestors watching with stone-eyed stares. He returned to the library, lantern in hand. The crime scene still spoke, and Price was ready to listen. The room was exactly as he'd left it, save the faint scent of pipe smoke, possibly from Lord Whitmore, who had taken to pacing the halls late at night. Price closed the doors behind him and relit the sconces. He climbed the spiral staircase once more, lantern held high, and examined the gallery where Trent had supposedly fallen. He crouched low where the lens of Trent's spectacles had been found and studied the banister. A small chip in the wood caught his eye, fresh, splintered. Then something glinted near the base of the rail. He picked it up. A small iron pin bent slightly, not part of the staircase. He pulled a handkerchief from his coat and wrapped the pin carefully before storing it in his pocket. Then he stood, his brow furrowed. His gaze swept to a shelf near the back corner of the gallery, where books on family genealogy were arranged by century. He examined the spines. One volume, labelled Whitmore Lineage, 17th to 19th centuries, was noticeably askew. He pulled it free and immediately noticed something odd. It was hollowed out. Inside the book was a folded paper. Not parchment, modern stationery, embossed in the corner with the House of Lords insignia. He unfolded it carefully. To Lord Whitmore, it is with urgency that we request confirmation regarding your family inheritance line. A question has been raised concerning the legitimacy of the title's passage through your line. Please submit any original testamentary documents prior to the end of the quarter, or the matter may be brought forward formally for review. The Right Honourable Reginald Sykes, Office of Peerage Records. Price exhaled. So someone had challenged Lord Whitmore's claim, and that someone was almost certainly Trent. which meant Whitmore had both knowledge of the will and motive to ensure Trent was silenced before the scandal reached the public eye. But how had the letter ended up hidden in a false book? Whitmore wasn't a man to conceal things in corners. Someone else must have intercepted it and hidden it away. Someone inside the house. Price tucked the note away and began to descend the staircase when a faint creak echoed through the manor. He froze. Another sound, closer this time. Footsteps, deliberate, software coming from the east wing. He extinguished his lantern, slipped into the shadows near the library entrance, and waited. A tall figure passed the archway, unaware of Price just inches away. It was Harold Finch. In a nightrobe, carrying a bundle under his arm, he moved furtively down the corridor and disappeared into a side door. Price followed at a distance. The door opened into a narrow service passage, leading to the linen stores. Finch was already inside, fumbling with a box near the corner of the room, whispering to himself. Price stepped into the room. "Late night for organising sheets, Mr. Finch?" Finch jolted and dropped the bundle. Papers scattered across the stone floor. His face turned ashen. "Inspector, I couldn't sleep. I thought to—" Price knelt and gathered the pages swiftly. Most were handwritten letters, bearing Trent's name. Price read one. "You cannot hide this forever, Finch. I know what your great-uncle did in India. The records are clear. Either you support my claim to Ravenwood, or I'll send the documents to the Colonial Office." P.T. Price glanced up. "Seems Mr. Trent was blackmailing you." Finch slumped against the wall, defeated. Yes, damn him. He'd found out about my family's involvement in a military scandal in the Punjab. Something buried, something I never even knew myself. But he threatened to make it public. I couldn't afford the shame. My professional reputation, my collections, they'd all vanish. "Did you kill him to stop him?" "No," Finch said quickly. Too quickly. I wanted to, but I swear to you I didn't. I burned most of his letters. I was trying to hide these in case anyone searched my rooms." Price studied him. Fear was genuine, but guilt still uncertain. "Go back to your room, Mr. Finch, and keep your door unlocked tonight." At dawn, Price sat once more in the study, reviewing what he had gathered. A forged or hidden will, proving Trent had rightful claim to the estate. A family chapel crypt, concealing that will. A House of Lords inquiry into Whitmore's lineage. Finch being blackmailed by Trent. A bent pin and a hollow book, both out of place. He drew a circle around Trent's last known location, the library gallery, and marked the irregularities. His spectacles left behind. His body found at the base of the stairs, some distance from where a man would naturally fall. And the iron pin, possibly from a sabotaged railing. A trap, perhaps. Someone had led him there. Someone had known he would investigate the family genealogy section. Someone had waited until Trent reached for that very book and ensured the fall that followed would look like an accident. A perfect plan, until now. Later that morning, as the sun struggled to break through the fog, Clara Whitmore knocked softly on the study door. "I found something else," she whispered, holding out a photograph. It showed her late aunt Margaret Whitmore, seated in the chapel garden, with Percival Trent, aged no more than 12, seated beside her. On the back of the photo was a single line in ink. "He will inherit everything one day. The truth cannot be buried forever." M.W. Inspector Price looked up slowly. "The past has a long shadow," he said quietly, "and someone here was desperate to keep it from reaching the present." Chapter 6. The Wrong Alibi. The dawn had burned away the last of the mist by the time Inspector Price gathered the household once again in the red drawing room. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the thick carpets. Breakfast had been served, but largely untouched. Every guest wore a carefully composed expression that could mean anything. Price stood near the hearth, arms folded behind his back, expression neutral. His eyes moved slowly across the assembled guests. "I have reason to believe that Mr. Trent was murdered, his death staged to resemble an accidental fall. More importantly, I believe the motive stems from a will, a document written decades ago by Elias Whitmore, naming Margaret Trent, his sister's daughter, as sole heir to Ravenwood Court. Lord Whitmore's eyes fled with visible alarm. Clara turned pale but said nothing. Colonel Hargrove sat straighter in his chair. Mrs. Archer raised a brow, intrigued. Finch, seated in the far corner, paled visibly. "This document," Price continued, "was hidden within the family chapel crypt. Trent found it, and someone here found out he did." Whitmore finally broke the silence. "Do you have proof of this, Inspector?" Price nodded calmly. "I do, and I have something else, a letter from the House of Lords, indicating that a formal inquiry had begun into the legitimacy of your title. That letter was stolen from your desk and hidden in the library." He let the words hang. Whitmore's face darkened, but he said nothing. "I now intend to verify alibis given during the time of death," Price said, turning to Mr. Finch. "You claim to be with Lady Frances in the drawing room." Finch nodded nervously. "That's correct." "I'm afraid that's not true," Price said. "Lady Frances has since admitted she left the drawing room for some time to retrieve her shawl. You were alone. You had opportunity." Finch blanched. I only lied because I was afraid. I didn't kill him, I swear it. I was frightened because of the blackmail." "What blackmail?" The words had come not from Price, but from Mrs. Archer, who now leaned forward with interest. Price answered without hesitation. Trent had found documents implicating Finch's family in colonial crimes. He threatened to expose them if Finch did not support his claim to the estate. That gave Finch motive, but not necessarily guilt. "I didn't lay a hand on him," Finch cried, voice cracking. "Perhaps not," Price said, "but the truth is no longer just about who could have killed Mr. Trent. It's about who needed to." Later that day, Price asked Colonel Hargrove to join him in the billiards room, where the Colonel claimed he'd been alone during the time of the murder. The Colonel stood ramrod straight, cue in hand, trying to appear unbothered. "Enjoy the game, Colonel?" Price asked. "Solitary billiards sharpens the eye." "So I've heard. Odd thing, though. There's no chalk on the cue tip, no indentation on the bays, no balls left disturbed. You didn't play at all, did you?" Hargrove shifted his jaw. "I sat, that's all." "You're lying," Price said flatly. "Someone saw you in the east corridor, not far from the library, at 7:15. Hargrove's nostrils flared. "This is outrageous." "Not half as outrageous as what Mr. Trent uncovered about your court-martial in 1888. A dishonourable discharge quietly overturned, yes? I imagine you'd do quite a lot to keep that from the papers." The Colonel stepped back, fury in his eyes. "Are you accusing me?" "I'm pointing out motive, but murder? Not yet." That afternoon, Clara Whitmore approached Price in the library, her face pale. "There's something you should know," she said in a whisper. "I found something odd in the East Conservatory. A loose tile, under it. This." She handed him a small object, a length of wire twisted at the ends. Price examined it. "Tripwire?" "I think so." "Where exactly did you find it?" "Near the East Wing Gallery stair, just beyond the library." He stared at the wire, then at the chipped stair tread he'd noted earlier. Something clicked. Trent had not merely fallen. He'd been tripped by someone who rigged the stair to collapse his footing. Only someone with access to the house's interior and to Trent's habits could have planned it. Only someone with technical skill or military experience. Someone like Colonel Hargrove, or perhaps someone hiding in plain sight. That evening, Price invited Dr. Julian North for a private discussion in the study. "You were once Mr. Trent's student," Price said, seating himself behind the desk. "You had reason to dislike him." "I had cause, yes, but I wouldn't kill over academic embarrassment." "Not just embarrassment," Price said calmly. "He publicly accused you of falsifying patient reports during your internship, ruined your reputation. Had you struck from the London hospital register? That's more than embarrassment." North's hand trembled. "I rebuilt everything after that." "But Trent threatened to tear it all down again. I found his notes. He had a dossier on you. And you are one of only 3 people here who understand how to rig a tripwire with perfect timing." North's mouth went dry. "You can't prove." "There are boot marks in the dust by the conservatory door. Size 9, same as yours. I already had Mrs. Norwood measure them. But before he could finish, the door burst open. It was Simeon Clark, the young artist. "Inspector, there's something you need to see," he said breathlessly. "In the back of the studio, in the West Wing." Clark led Price down the corridor and into his makeshift studio. Canvases lined the walls, unfinished portraits, dramatic seascapes. At the back was a small table strewn with charcoal sketches. "This one," Clark said, pointing. It was a sketch of Percival Trent on the day of his death. Sharp chin, arched brow, glasses perched on nose. "I drew it from memory," Clark said. "But that's not what's odd. Look at this." He held out another sheet. It was a rough sketch of a floor plan, the library gallery, with notations in the margins. Steady tread. 3 steps in. Loose joint. Wire at hip height. Price studied the handwriting. It was not Clark's. It was in the waste bin. Someone tossed it. Probably thought no one would look. Price's eyes narrowed. He knew the writing. As night fell, he walked the long corridor to confront his final suspect. Tomorrow, the truth would come out in full. But tonight, Inspector Price knew one thing with certainty. He had found the killer. Chapter 7. A Whisper in the Chapel. Night had fully settled over Ravenwood Court. The manor stood still under a blanket of dark clouds, its windows aglow with flickering lamps. Somewhere on the grounds, an owl hooted low and long, answered only by the wind in the trees. Inspector Price moved through the east corridor in silence. In his hand he held a folded slip of paper, the floor plan sketch, annotated with precise detail about how to rig a fatal fall on the gallery stairs. The handwriting was distinctive, angular, exacting, confident. It matched the notations on the margin of a medical treatise he'd seen in Dr. Julian North's room. But Dr. North was not the only one with motive, and the planning behind this murder was too careful to belong solely to an academic grudge. No, someone else was involved, and to draw them out, he needed the stage. At dawn, Inspector Price sent word throughout the manor. All guests are requested to assemble in the family chapel at 8 o'clock this morning. By the appointed hour, they stood inside the chapel, Lady Frances, with her silver-headed cane, Colonel Hargrove, stiff and scowling, Mrs. Archer whispering something amused under her breath, and Mr. Finch shifting nervously beside Simeon Clark. Dr. North stood near the rear, pale and silent, while Clara kept near her uncle, Lord Whitmore, who looked grave, older than his years. Only Inspector Price stood apart near the altar, a small coffer placed at his side. When the murmurs quieted, he turned to face them. "Ladies and gentlemen, Huey," he said solemnly, "thank you for indulging me. I brought you here because this place, this chapel, holds not only your family's sacred ground, Lord Whitmore, but also the truth behind why Percival Trent was murdered." He rested a hand lightly on the coffer. This box was discovered behind a false panel in the crypt below. Inside was a will, written by Elias Whitmore, leaving the entire estate to his niece, Margaret Trent. Percival, her son, discovered it, and had he made it public, Ravenwood Court would no longer belong to the Whitmore name. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Whitmore's face darkened, but he did not deny it. Price continued. "More than that, Trent had begun the legal process. I discovered a letter from the House of Lords, hidden in a hollowed-out book, requesting proof of your entitlement, Lord Whitmore. That letter was intercepted by someone in this room." He stepped forward. "But Trent didn't just uncover the will. He threatened several of you individually. Mr. Finch, he threatened to reveal your great-uncle's war crimes. Colonel Hargrove, he had notes suggesting he was about to expose your false court exoneration. And Dr. North," here Price turned directly to him, "he had written proof of your falsified patient records, the very mistake that cost a child her life. A mistake you buried. He found it. He intended to use it." North's face was grey. "It's true," he whispered. "All of it. I hated him for it. But I swear I didn't kill him." Price didn't reply. Instead, he gestured to the tripwire, the iron pin, and the sketch. This plan was executed with precision. The gallery banister was rigged with a thin wire, carefully threaded, secured with pins, and tied off beneath the third stair. Trent stepped into it, stumbled, and fell to his death. The wire was removed before anyone arrived, leaving no trace. A perfect crime. He let the silence linger. And yet, not perfect, because it required someone who not only had the technical ability, but also access to the tools, and knowledge of the house's construction. Now he turned sharply, pointing at Clara Whitmore. The room turned as one. Clara blinked, startled. "What? No, I don't." "You grew up here. You knew every stone of this estate. You knew where to find the chapel key. And more than that, you stood to lose everything." "I didn't." "You forged your aunt's death record," Price said, his voice now unflinching. "Margaret Trent died quietly, and you ensured her connection to the Whitmores was wiped clean. So no claim could be made through her son. But Percival Trent arrived with proof. He threatened your inheritance." Clara's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't kill him. I forged that record, yes, but I didn't plan his death." Price turned away, and then looked back, suddenly sharp. "I know, because the one who did plan it was not you." Now he turned to the final suspect. "Lord Whitmore," he said, "you knew everything. You saw the letter from the Lords, and you saw Trent's determination. You realised you were no longer the legal heir. So you involved someone else, someone discreet, someone loyal, someone willing to dirty their hands." He walked over and opened the coffer. Inside, along with the will, was a button, black onyx engraved with a W. "I found the same missing button on the coat of your butler, Mr. Hensley." Gasps again. Lord Whitmore's face was unreadable. "You had your servant rig the trap," Price said calmly. "He followed Trent into the library, waited for him to reach the upper gallery, then triggered the wire from below. It snapped taut, Trent tripped, and the rest was gravity. You then burned Trent's papers in his room and had Hensley remove the wire. Clean, efficient." Clara turned toward her uncle, voice trembling. "Is it true?" Lord Whitmore looked down for a long moment. Then slowly he spoke. "He was going to ruin everything, not just for me, for you, for the family, for the generations before us. You think I wanted this? I served the crown, I upheld our name, and he was going to drag it all through the mud with some crumbling scrap of parchment." "So you killed him?" she asked, stunned. Whitmore shook his head. "Number, I asked Hensley to scare him, to give him a fright. Maybe take the documents and throw them in the fire, that's all. But Hensley, he went further. Too far." He looked up at Inspector Price, his eyes suddenly very old. "I suppose it doesn't matter now." Price spoke softly. "You knew what he would do. That makes you complicit." Hensley was arrested quietly that evening, having been intercepted at the station, attempting to leave town under a false name. He confessed under questioning, confirming Price's deductions. Lord Whitmore was taken into custody, though the weight of his social standing ensured that the process would unfold slowly and likely in the shadows. As for Clara, the Crown opened a review of the forged records. In time, Percival Trent's claim was posthumously validated. The estate was to pass to his only living cousin, Clara Whitmore. Once she renounced all fraudulent actions, she accepted, with grace and tears. Inspector Price left Ravenwood the next morning beneath a brooding sky. Chapter 8. The Twist in the Will. 3 weeks had passed since the storm at Ravenwood Court. Winter had settled fully across Devonshire. Inspector Price sat alone at a corner table in the Larkspur Inn, a modest public house on the outskirts of London. Before him lay a folder bearing the royal seal of Scotland Yard, its contents neatly summarised in his final report on the death of Percival Trent. He took a sip of dark tea, turned the last page, and leaned back in his chair and let his thoughts return to Ravenwood. Mr. Hensley, the butler, had confessed in full after 2 days of questioning. "I did what I was asked," he had said, his voice flat, an expression devoid of emotion. "But I made it final. Lord Whitmore didn't ask for that. I took the matter into my own hands." He described how he waited in the corridor outside the library as Trent ascended the stairs, how he tied the tripwire from a discreet hook in the stairs' carved base to a small nail behind the third post of the railing. He had rehearsed it earlier that week, twice. Trent never noticed. "I didn't hate him," he said, "but I hated what he was doing to the house, to its memory." His loyalty to the Whitmores had not wavered. It had simply been misplaced. Lord Whitmore himself had confessed to orchestrating the theft of the letter and to destroying Trent's partially burned notebook. He denied authorizing the murder, but accepted full responsibility for the cover-up. The Crown declined to prosecute him publicly. He was stripped of his ceremonial peerage and quietly removed from his remaining positions in Parliament. A man of stature, falling in silence, Clara Whitmore had met with royal solicitors and conceded her part in forging her aunt's death certificate years prior. A desperate act of preservation, she had claimed, encouraged by the weight of inheritance thrust upon her when she was barely of age. "I did it for the estate," she said, in their final conversation, "to hold it together. But I see now, all I did was bind it tighter to a lie." The will of Elias Whitmore was officially recognised as legitimate. Percival Trent, though dead, was declared the rightful heir to Ravenwood. With no other surviving kin, the estate passed to Clara, but only on the condition that she publicly acknowledge the truth and restore the family's records. She agreed. Ravenwood Court would now stand not as a monument to lineage, but as a museum, dedicated to the history of the Whitmore and Trent families and to the perils of legacy built on a mission. Price finally finished his tea, paid his bill, and left.